Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. Does this sound super echoey? No? Okay. Tonight, perfect. Tonight we have with us Iowa Writers Workshop graduate, Helen Stefaniak, and she is going to be talking about her 6-minute memoir. She is also the author of her third novel, The World of Pondside, which, if you might have been here, she came this past summer and talked about that book. She is professor of creative writing at Creighton University and teaches in the MFA program at Pacific University in Oregon. She lives in Iowa City with her husband John in the 165-year-old Stagecoach Inn they restored. So as I said, tonight she'll be talking about the 6-minute memoir. And we also, which was published this past fall by the University of Iowa Press. And also after the program, Prairie Lights is here to sell some of her books, and she will be happy to sign them. So please help me welcome Helen.
It turned green. Can you hear me? No? It turned green. She said if it turned green, you could hear me.
Just have to get closer to it.
Yeah.
Closer like this?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, then
Turn it on the podium.
I think we'll have to turn it up.
Is the microphone on the podium?
No, it's flipped to her.
It's right before me. Yeah, I need to move it closer.
That's it.
There we go. That's probably better, huh? Let me clip it to more than just my sweater. Let's see. Yeah. Let me clip it to some. I bet they can hear me. Can you hear me now? No.
Sorry, it's loading.
Oh. I don't know. It sounds like I'm making a lot of noise with the.
Yeah.
Yeah, that you can hear, huh?
Yeah.
So how about now? Is that pretty good? That's pretty good? Okay, everybody's, I want to make sure everybody who's been so kind as to come here this evening will be able to hear me. Assuming, okay. Great, I noticed there's a gentleman with the Cardinals shirt on. It's opening day. Yeah, great. I think they're playing right now, the Cardinals, aren't they? Pardon me? You did. So did I, but yes, you did. And in fact, I thought about reading. There is in this book, one of the essays is about baseball and kind of about my love of baseball, which comes from a strange place, not really where most people talk about baseball. But having enticed you with that little bit, I'm not going to read that essay. I don't think so. Because I feel as though maybe there are enough people who are not totally engaged with baseball who might prefer to hear something else. Although the essay is, for anybody. It doesn't have to be for a baseball fan. Basketball. Tomorrow night, right? Isn't it tomorrow night? Yeah, tomorrow night. I don't have an essay about basketball. I have one about soccer, but about coaching soccer with the Iowa City Kickers when my daughter was in grade school. I don't know, maybe I'll read that one. There are each of these, the essays are, here's how it goes. Each essay is its own self-contained unit. So as far as I'm concerned, each essay is a memoir. And it's a 6-minute memoir, although that's kind of an estimate, because Dennis Reese at Iowa Public Radio came across The Source magazine. The Source is a free magazine. It comes out of Fairfield. You find it, okay. Well, I wrote a column. I was invited to write a column in the Iowa Source. In 1998. And I've actually written a column in the Source, little essays, for over 20 years now. Now, some years I would write one every month, and other years I'd write a couple of them in the course of the year. I didn't always have one. It kind of depended on what else was going on in my life. But Dennis came across one of those, I guess, and he invited me to read it on IPR. And it was short enough, and he liked it, and so he said, well, you could read more of them, but they have to be 6 minutes long. They could be 3 minutes long, or they could be 6 minutes long. And these were like the time, the slots that they needed to fill. And then they would just use them, it wasn't associated with any particular show. They would just use them, when they needed to fill in 6 minutes, so they could plug one of these in. So quite a few of them have been read over the years, starting in 1998 on IPR. Not more recently, but in the first 10 or so years of writing them. And once in a while after that, there would be one on IPR. So that's where the 6 minute comes from. And it's an approximate time, but I mean, it was a maximum. It wasn't approximate for the ones that I read, actually, but then some of the others I could kind of stretch it one way or the other, depending on how much room the editor, Claudia Miller, could give me. Now, the wonderful thing about this column was that Claudia said I could write about anything I wanted to write about. It wasn't like a column on technology or a column on birds, which the Source had a beautiful column on birds for years, or anything, or sports or book reviews. I could just write about anything. And so I did. And it was, I'm telling you some of the things that are in the introduction to this book. There's a section called What Readers Can Expect to Find in This Book. So I'm telling you ahead of time what you might expect to find in the book. Well, I could write about anything, whatever that I wanted. And at first I thought, no, I can't do this. I was working on my first novel, or what I hoped was going to be my first novel, and I was teaching, and I thought, I can't possibly do this. And then I started thinking about how a novel or a full book-length memoir is a big task. And what Claudia wanted from me, what the editor wanted from me, was just something short, something complete in itself. And it occurred to me that that might be a good thing to do, to be able to leave the big project for a week. That's what it usually took me, about a week, to draft these. And they did get revised before they were put into the book. But I would set aside a week and I would just work on the column. And in order to work on the column, what I was doing was I was looking at notebooks, at my notebooks, because over the years I have filled lots of notebooks with all kinds of stuff, which is why it was really good that she said I could write, these could be about anything, whatever that I wanted. And I thought I would start by reading you one of them. Makes sense, I guess. I figure I can probably read to you maybe 3 of them and talk about them in between. And this first one is called, hold on a minute. This first one I did read at Prairie Lights in October. So anyone who was there at Prairie Lights in October has heard it before. But I should tell you that at a reading, it wasn't the one at Prairie Lights, but at another reading in Cedar Rapids, one of the people in the audience, when I was saying, well, perhaps you've heard this one before, she said that she had been reading them, the ones that especially spoke to her, over and over again. And in some ways, they're a little bit like poems that way, that you can read them over again. Because she said, I read it many times, and it's just as good. Well, okay, good, that sounds like, I like to hear that, I like to hear that. So even if you've heard this or read it before, you will, I think you will, you might enjoy it anyway. It's called, and it takes place in Iowa City. There, the column was called Alive and Well in the Middle of the Middle West. That's when we came up with that title for the column. So that gave you a little bit of direction for, and it suited the sort of thing that I collect in my notebook. And so let me let me read From the Locker Room, Your Life in Technicolor. And I gotta find that page again. Let's see. Okay. And I think what we'll do is I'll read a few and I'll talk about them, and we'll have time for questions. We'll also talk about the workshop that was in the bulletin. Is it called the bulletin? And the newsletter.
Called the memo.
It's the memo. All right. The description of the workshop that I've been offering after readings. Sometimes right after the reading, but not always, sometimes on another day. And if people are interested, Dave Anson said we could work out a date and a time. So I hope you'll enjoy From the Locker Room. It really will give you an idea of the kind of thing that is that I'm looking at as, I can't walk away, sorry, as a memoir. And it also kind of gives you some insight into this process of writing them, I guess. Sometimes the world goes gray on you, fuzzy. The details blur. The colors fade. You check your glasses, but that doesn't seem to be the problem. The letters on the computer screen, the figures on your bank statement, these are all too clear. No, this is a haziness of the soul. A featureless fog in which you can see all your tomorrows creeping in their petty pace through week after week, looking as gray as the March sky outside your window. I know I've got them, not the blues, but the grays, when I can't come up with anything to think about while I swim, which is when I do most of my best thinking. Or when I look through my notebook and find I haven't written down a wacky bit of conversation or even a heartfelt description of the sunrise in more than a week. I had to page all the way back to mid-January to find something better than sun appears at 7:55. Or Omaha squirrels like apples more than corn, which can be important information. And it was mentioned that I taught at Creighton University for quite a few years. What I found was a conversation overheard in the locker room on campus at Creighton. Being a swimmer, I spend a lot of time in locker rooms. One young woman was telling another that her mother was worried that she'd forget where she came from after she graduated and got married and started making her share of $250,000 a year. I don't know what field she was studying, but just by the way she said Jim and I's combined salary, I could tell she wasn't an English major. Being an English teacher myself, I knew this evidence of my irrelevance in the great money-making scheme of things was not what I needed to pull me out of the doldrums. So I kept looking until I found another locker room conversation, also in January, this one with a little girl at Mercer Park Pool in Iowa City. Dark-haired, skinny, and wet, she was walking ahead of me out of the showers, each of us wrapped in a towel, when I said, "Brr." She looked up at me over her shoulder and asked, "What did you say?" "I'm freezing," I told her. By now we were at the bench in front of our respective lockers, which were, following the natural law of locker selection in an otherwise empty locker room, side by side. I asked her if she was cold. She said she wasn't. I told her she was lucky. "Well," she said, letting her towel slip off her shoulders to reveal a leopard skin swimsuit, "I was in the hot tub for a long time, you see, and then I had a warm shower." We dried and dressed in silence for a while. I was about half finished when she asked, "How old are you?" It was not a prying question, but a conversation starter. "Oh, I'm old," I said, just like a grown-up. I thought she looked a little disappointed in me, so I quickly asked, "How old are you?" 6, she said. "Well," I said, shamed by her forthrightness, this is an essay that was written a few years ago, "I'm 46. When she opened her mouth wide in astonishment, I could see that her 2 front teeth were missing on top and just starting to grow in on the bottom. "That has a 6 too," she said. She looked pleased about this as she buttoned and zipped. After a while she offered, My birthday is the same as my grandpa's. It's March 5th. I pointed out that it was coming up very soon. She happily agreed. Then she asked, "So is it your birthday today?" "No," I said, "but it is in January." Her whole face lit up with joy for me. She said, "This is January." Basking in the glow of my good fortune, we continued our locker room business. She was still smiling to herself when I pulled my boots out of the locker and stood them beside the bench. "Whoa, those are tall boots," she said. "You can really walk in the snow in those." She paused in the course of putting a pink and white boot on her own foot and chopped the top of her thigh with the side of her hand. "The snow by our house is up to here on me," she said. "The snowplows made mountains." She marked a place on her pink sweatpants again. "I'll bet your boots would come up to here on me." "I think they would." "I bet they're good where it's drifted," she said. I said they were. She was all dressed now and mentioned, in case I was interested, that she would be back at the pool for a birthday party on Sunday. Then she left the locker room, lost in a big navy blue nylon parka with a fake fur-trimmed hood. A few minutes later, I was walking out to the car when I noticed that the little girl was walking many steps behind me. She was completely absorbed in unwrapping a candy bar, her face hidden by the hood of her parka. From the car, I called goodbye to her. She looked up from her candy bar long enough to wave. I was about to tell my husband about her when he looked out the window and said, to my surprise, "That little girl is an unusual child." Neither of us knew her. His story about her was better than mine. It seems he had been in a hot tub one time with the little girl in the leopard skin suit. At Mercer Park, the hot tub is a rectangle about 10 feet long by 8 feet wide and 40 inches deep. She and another little girl were moving from place to place between the bubbling spouts in the side of the hot tub, talking about which places were their lucky spots to sit. The little girl in the leopard skin suit ended up between two bubbling spouts, with my husband in the corner to the left of her, and another man, the only other person in the hot tub, to her right. "This is my luckiest spot," the little girl told her friend. When the friend asked why, she answered, "Because I'm sitting between two brave men." John and the other man looked at each other over the top of her head, but all they saw was an ordinary guy on the other side of the hot tub, middle-aged and wet. "She must have been telling herself a story in her head," John said to me in the car. That's where my entry in the notebook ends. But sitting here at my desk with gray sky and melting snow outside the window, I can picture her adventures like a movie. A little girl in hip boots drives a team of of leopards, through a blizzard, across mountains of snow, those two brave men in sleds beside her. Or maybe they're firefighters, the three of them, climbing ladders and wielding hoses to rescue Grandpa from the inferno ignited by the multitude of candles on his birthday cake. Whatever the story in her head, you can bet that it played in Technicolor. No gray days for this child, not when there's a drama in every hot tub, a story behind every face, and anyone's birthday is cause for joy. So that's one of them. And it's kind of an example of, there are many different kinds of things in here. And that's just like something that happened one day, right? And it was a little girl I didn't know, and I don't remember actually seeing her again. We just didn't happen to cross paths within conversational distance. But you can see why, if that happened to you, if you met that little girl, and you came out into the car, and your husband also knew the little girl, said what he said, that little girl is an unusual child, because you were all set to tell him that story, right? Well, that's something, that's a moment in your life that, first of all, you want to tell other people about, right? Before I wrote it down, I told my husband about it at the very least. And it's a moment that, in some way, sometimes a small way, sometimes a big way, is part of what makes you who you are. This book is full of ordinary moments, rather than momentous events. There are no, there are no weddings. Actually, there is a mention of a graduation, although the whole point is I didn't get any pictures. And it goes on from there, of my son's graduation. But that's the kind of memoirs you find in this book. Although there are other kinds of examples, they're not arranged chronologically. And they range from 1998 through 2020, maybe just 2020. And the date of their publication is indicated. Although I told them, just make that as small as you can, because that's kind of not the point. This isn't chronological. These are all these sort of individual moments, and you could read them in any order. So what I decided to do was I put them in groups, in categories. So first there's a sampler, and that just has four different kinds of essays in it. Kind of contemporary event, sort of like the one I just read, but a different one. And then something from my old neighborhood called Positively 4th Street, Where Mothers Rule, from my childhood in Milwaukee. And then there's another one called Great Aunts from the Family Tree, Georgia branch, because my mother was from Georgia, and we visited there all the time. And then the last one in the sampler is Cardiac Dreams, and In the Heart of the Country, which is a title stolen from William Gass. But and that's about getting a cardiac ultrasound. So a very a wide variety of things. Then the other categories are so the sampler had was a sampler. But then the other things are categorized: the old neighborhood, old country, new country, which has some stories about my grandmother and other relatives coming to the United States from the Austro-Hungarian Empire around the time of the First World War. And then there's another section called Theories of the Self. Take Me Out to the Ballgame is in there. There's another called Exercising Options, and it includes an essay called The Porridge Club. First we swim, then we eat. And while I have already mentioned swimming, I think I'm not going to read that one. Actually, there's two. There's a night swimming, another swimming essay, and the exercising options. And there are other categories are outside the comfort zone, the true perils of parenting, and then in a class by itself, there's an excerpt there are excerpts from my diary when I was 12, and my daughter's diary when she was 12. Oh, our lives were so different, but we were both 12. And then there's one called Role Models, and the one I just read to you, From the Locker Room, Living Your Life in Technicolor, that's categorized with the role models. Because you can see how that little girl is a role model, in all kinds of ways, even though she was only 6. Now the next category is travels, and then there's critters, animal stories, and then big ideas. And under big ideas, we have one essay called David the Deconstructionist, which is about my grandson when he was 2 and 3. And the deconstructionist part of it is about Jacques Derrida and deconstruction, and the two of them are together in that essay, as my grandson demonstrates the free play of signifiers as a very little boy. Then there's On Location in Iowa and Booking It, about books. And then the last two sections are actually groups of essays. So that over the course of 5 months, I wrote 5 essays in a series. And then another, over a course of 5 months, or 3 months, I wrote 3 essays in a series. One of them is about my brain event, and the other is hysterical preservation. And that's about it was mentioned in the introduction that my husband and I live in a 165-year-old stagecoach inn, or former stagecoach inn in Iowa City. And that was a house that we really had to take down to the studs, and mostly because of the last person to live there before us, who had 50 cats. And so it wasn't the sort of thing you could take care of with, smell will be gone or something, or something like that. So I'm going to read to you, I do want to tell you about the hysterical preservation. That she was reading from the latest issue of Iowa Magazine, which has this great picture of John Irving on the cover. It's a great story interview with John Irving. But it also has a little story. Well, what it has is an excerpt from from Hysterical Preservation, that group of essays. And it's the title of the excerpt is Behind the Plaster, a Circus Mystery. And I think since I bet a lot of you get this magazine one way or the other, I don't think I'll read you that one. But we did indeed find circus posters pretty much melded to the wall. You couldn't take them off. Partly eaten by insects and kind of really from the inside we found it under the lath and plaster, and from the outside we found them under the clapboard, because eventually we also replaced the clapboard, but in later years. And it was clear they were like a picture puzzle, because it was clear that one side had part of a horse and the other side had the other part of a horse of the same, what was probably the same horse. And I've actually seen this on other old homes in Iowa City when they're redoing, when they're taking the clapboard off or something, putting siding on it. The house that houses the Iowa Writers Workshop, what's the name of that? The Iowa Writers Workshop house.
The Dye House.
Yes.
The Dye House now.
Yeah.
It's fairly recent, though.
Yes, it is. It wasn't when I was in the workshop. We were in EPB. But anyway, I happened to walk past that house when they must have been, replacing some of the siding, and sure enough, it was the same thing. And where did those come from? Well, those are used boards. Those are recycled boards, from a barn that advertised the circus, or from some kind of building that advertised the circus. So it presented a great mystery that I needed to be solved because of the lore about our house. Our house is the house on the bottom of Ridge Road that, Irving Weber and Margaret Keynes has written about, associating with the Underground Railroad and other things that had to have occurred, on a certain date. And these circus posters established a different date for the house, because you can go to the Circus Museum in Baraboo, Wisconsin, and lots of other places. Now you can just look it up online, and you can find out where the circus was. This was the P.T. Barnum circus, on what day, every day that it was traveling. So the day that the first time the circus came to Iowa City was too late for the Underground Railroad. And so that presented a mystery that I think I figured out and wrote about it in here. So it turns out, anyway, it turns out Irving Weber was not all wrong by any means. But you did have to, the house presented this puzzle once you knew those posters from, I think it was 1877, were the boards constructing the house. There was no fire damage or anything like that. It was just, this is what the house was built out of. So you might want to take a look at that in either in the Iowa Magazine, which has, it's five of the essays in here are a series about it, or you can find all 5 of them in the book and kind of go through the whole process. But anyway, I think I'm going to read to you, let's see what time it is. Oh, that's not too bad. Another essay, if that's all right with you. And this one is called Mother and Child Reunion. The subtitle, they all had subtitles. The subtitle is What I Did on My Summer Vacation. And it's from over a decade ago. Okay. So, what I did on my summer vacation. I drove 3,969 miles with my mother. In less than 2 weeks, I drove from Iowa City to Milwaukee, where my mother lives, to Macon, Georgia, where my mother is from, to South Florida, where my son now lives, to St. Louis, middle daughter, and back. My mother, whose maximum highway driving speed is 50 miles per hour, never took the wheel. She did her share of the driving from the passenger seat. I thought that my mother and I had resolved our mother-daughter issues, that our relationship had reached a plateau of mutual respect and affection. By the way, this one is under the category of the true perils of parenting. Either I was wrong, or there is no plateau that won't crumble under the pressure of 3,969 miles in a car together. One day into the trip, I understood exactly why my sister, who spent part of her summer vacation on a Mediterranean cruise, had given my mother a string of worry beads from Greece and wished us good luck instead of going with us. We hadn't even cleared Illinois before we started arguing, amazed at the heat we brought to topics like whether the left lane really is for passing. The books on tape I brought were no help. They always seemed to reach a point where the frequency of cursing exceeded my mother's tolerance level. Having already fast-forwarded through the sexy parts, by the time we cut out the expletives, we'd have lost the thread of the plot. Stopping for the night caused more trouble. I had forgotten that my mother needs a light on to fall asleep. To stay asleep, I need darkness. Every night I woke up 3 or 4 times thinking it was morning. To a woman like my mother, accustomed to rising at 4:30 a.m., anyone who wants to sleep past daylight looks like a slacker anyway. At 5:45 one morning, I heard her mutter as she got up, "Well, I can't stay in bed all day." Lack of sleep takes its toll on a person. Halfway through Tennessee, I found myself thinking that if my mother clutched one more time at the medals she wears around her neck, I might have to reach over and strangle her with them. On the other hand, who could blame her? We saw more accidents in 2 weeks than I'd seen in all the rest of my life put together. My mother had countless opportunities, some of them justified, to utter her 4 favorite words. "Watch out, Mary Helen." Mom's holy medals aside, it was nothing short of a miracle that we didn't get into an accident ourselves, especially in the harrowing moment when my right rear tire blew out, not, thank God, on I-75, but on the curve of a shoulderless 2-lane road between Haddock, Georgia, and Milledgeville. Seems we picked up a screwdriver-sized spike, possibly during our visit to Aunt Molly's salvage yard. Luckily, my mother and 2 of her sisters were in the car when the tire blew. What was that? "Oh my Lord, watch out, Mary Helen." Without their support and advice, I would have had to handle the situation myself, aided only by a very nice Baldwin County law officer who saw our Volvo limp off the road. A soft-spoken fellow, gray at the temples, in a crisp white shirt and tie, the officer radioed Bud's Wrecking in Haddock and waited with us for the truck to arrive, and Shirley asked him if he was married. In Georgia, aunts and great-aunts kept saying how nice it was that my mother and I had made this trip together. Guiltily, I sipped sweet tea. In Florida, my mother and I put up such a good front that my son didn't even know we were crabby. Jeff was eager to show us things. We saw his new car, his new apartment with the lovely pool, his new clothes, his new furniture. The family picture I'd sent him was framed on his dresser. He showed us where he worked, a video production outfit. He was tanned and handsome, wearing a bright green checked shirt that he never would have worn in Iowa City. "That shirt looks nice on you," I told him. I could see he was pleased to hear it. Mom and I maintained our uneasy truce. When I went for an early morning swim at Jeff's place, she came down to the pool with me to make sure I wouldn't drown. "Oh, Mom," I said. She reminded me of the time I nearly drowned in a motel pool on the way to Georgia years ago. I reminded her that I couldn't swim back then because she wouldn't let me take lessons. To change the subject, she said, "Do you do this for exercise or fun?" "Exercise," I told her, as I threw my arm over my head in a leisurely backstroke. She looked doubtful, but she strolled around the pool while I swam back and forth. I showed her what I could do, backstroke, side stroke, breaststroke, sort of, and the crawl, with my face in the water and everything. Look at me, Mom, I was thinking. At the beach in Fort Lauderdale, Mom explored the shops across the street, swimwear, souvenirs, while Jeff and I waded in the clearest, warmest water imaginable, waves breaking around our ankles. I regretted leaving my wet swimsuit at the apartment, and in a moment of reckless inspiration, I decided to go across the street and buy another one. I expected an argument from my mother, but all she said was, "Hurry up, whatever you do. It's hot." She and Jeff sat at a sidewalk cafe with a cool drink while I sweated it out in the fitting room. Buying that swimsuit was one of the best ideas I've ever had. Jeff and I made a heap of our clothes on the beach, shoes on top to keep them from blowing away, and spent the next 20 minutes throwing ourselves into the waves like a couple of little kids. Jeff might have been 10 years old instead of 24. For that matter, I might have been 10 myself. And my mother? She watched us from under the palm trees that bordered the beach. When we joined her there in the shade, dripping and carrying our sandy clothes, she said, "It's much cooler on this side of the street." And then, "That suit looks nice on you, Mary Helen." I was pleased to hear it. I hope she could tell. So that's another kind, right, of experience that defines, our relationship and who we both are, and also puts you, the reader, there. Right? One of the probably the number one principle in these 6-minute memoirs, some of which are longer than 6 minutes, is that they focus on a moment. They might focus on a couple of moments, but there's not one in here that doesn't bring to life a particular moment. It might just tell one, and actually really both of the ones that I've read to you so far, kind of tell a little story. Not all of them do that. In the workshop that we've been talking about, that I've done with a number of people, it's to some extent, it's based on this book. In the back of the book, there are prompts that are, I kind of came up with them after my own essays. And pretty much the prompts encourage you to think about some very particular time and try to put it down on the page. And that's kind of the starting point. Sometimes you'll find that once you've done that, your work is almost done, The significance of the event is also clear. I would maintain that in the two ones that I read to you, the significance of those events is, just kind of clear in the telling. Oh, I say a little bit of editorializing, at least in the one in the locker room, not so much in this one. But for the most part, by putting the reader into the experience, you have the opportunity to make them feel its significance for you, and potentially for them. Since I think we read a lot of memoirs because we enjoy getting to experience someone else's life. Right? We don't always enjoy it. Sometimes it's difficult, but we still feel that it's something that enlarges us, right, somehow or another. And so anyway, in the workshop, I will ask you to peruse these prompts. And if you have a copy of the book, you can peruse them in the book. Otherwise, maybe look at somebody else's book. I can read some of them. But they will ask you to do things like, this is on page 259, if you happen to have it, to write about a time when a stranger came to your rescue. And there are a couple of essays in here, because then I say the names of a couple of essays in here in which a stranger came to my rescue. Right? Or write about a time when you were involved in a verbal misunderstanding, international or otherwise. Or write about when you had to sit very still. Or when you found or put something unusual in your pocket. Or write about a time when you solved a problem in an especially resourceful or creative way. Even as I read those to you, things come into your head that, oh yeah, that you start thinking of moments from your life that, would fulfill the assignment if this were the assignment given. And of course, it's not strictly an assignment. The moments that are suggested, the prompts, are also designed to make you think of other moments that I'm not specifically enumerating for you, but you think of other things. Because that's the other thing that I hear most from people who read the book. I do hear that they read it and then they read the ones they like the most over again, and sometimes over again. And the other thing that I hear is, oh, they made me think of, and it's something from their life. Or somebody told me, boy, if you were trying to make people remember stuff, you hit it out of the ballpark. Actually, is what they said, inappropriate for today, because they do that. That's, I think, what they do. I don't know. I think I'll stop there for a moment and say, oh, so I should add that in the workshop, we'll pick a prompt. You'll pick a prompt or alter one, and write about it. And it'll be a self-contained kind of thing. Write for 20 minutes, and then look at what you've got, or 30 minutes. We can all kind of agree at the beginning how long. And look at what you've got, and if you want to share it, you share it. And the rest of us will listen, and we'll talk to you about what we experienced, what kind of experience you made us have, what the significance of it seemed to be, felt like to us. Even though you might not have explained anything about its significance, you might have just put us there. As I guess I do in the story with my mother. I don't really tell you what it meant. But I think you can see what it meant just by how it went down. So there, and then we'll all respond, as they say. And then that's it. It's like it's a no stress workshop. But it does do a couple of different things, as it said in the, I guess this was described in the memo. But it's useful if you've never done this before at all, and you just think it would be fun to try. Or you're just starting to think of the things that you want to be able maybe to pass on to somebody, or just to write them down so you save them, right? It's good for that. If you're already working on a memoir, like a book-length memoir, for example, or portions of it, you'll end this workshop with a kind of inventory of possible moments from the prompts, of possible moments you might include, and then you'll also have an opportunity to write about one of them. And I think that's the most important thing, is to sit down and write it. And then from there you can do all sorts of things. You can make it better. You can make it longer. You can put it inside of something else. Lots of possibilities. Well, I was going to read one more. It's quarter to 8. And I should say I'd be happy to sign books if you would like a book. Or if you already have one. I'd be happy to sign one you already have. If you'd like a signature. I would say, I wish I had a big image of the cover. And wait, let me hold up. That's the what do you call it? The advanced reader's copy. It's crummy. But this is what it looks like. Can I come away? I can walk. But you can also come up here and see it, and nobody will, say anything if you just put it down and don't buy it. You can nevertheless look at the cover, which is a lovely cover. There are these colored rectangles, right? There are all these colored blocks of color. Well, there are 55 of them, and one for each essay. And then there's an image of a woman on a diving board with a swimming cap on. And she's about to dive into either the water, or maybe she's diving into those 55 essays, one or the other. So you should come and take a look at it for sure. The designer, her name of the cover, her name is Kimberly Glider. She's not an Iowa City person. The book is published by the University of Iowa Press, and they found her, they work with her. She's a very talented artist and designer, and the cover actually won an award. So it was recognized by literary hub as one of the best covers of books published in 2022, which is when it was published last year. So anyway, I didn't bring the big one, but there are some small ones. You can please feel free to look at them, and as I said, set it back down if you you're welcome to do that. So before I read the last one, which will be a different sort entirely actually, are there anybody like questions or comments or anything like either of the things I read ever happened to you? Yes.
Well, I just wanted to know, the two that you read leave people with a really nice feeling. Do all of them do that, or are there some that leave you with, a different kind of
A different kind of feeling. Well, to answer that, actually, since you do have a book, you can read what readers should expect to find in this book, and it'll answer it in more detail.
But I just got it, I can't do it.
No, we'll do it again. But you'll be able, I'm just saying, I'll say a little answer and you'll be able to read the rest of it. Well, the column, remember, was called Alive and Well in the Middle of the Middle West. And on the one hand, there are troublesome moments in here. My mother and I found that trip pretty troublesome, I'll tell you, in the course of it. But it does end on a truce, right? Or it's not even a truce. It's just a moment when you discover, well, you're both there's something alike about you. After all, it's not only that I look exactly like my mother, but there are things about us, so that kind of created a kind of rubric for it. But it also, I didn't feel compelled to avoid difficult things. There's a piece about my friend Sarah Lamb, who died of ALS. There are a couple of pieces about her. One earlier in her life when she's discovering all that she can't do, and then one after her death. But you see, like even that one, she's in the category she's in is also role models, and so there are ones about people who died, but and people who were close to me who died, which made me very sad. But I don't write about being sad. I think that you can tell I was sad about that loss. But instead I want to give you, because this person was such a gift to me, that I want to give you, the reader, that gift as much as I can. So since you asked that, I'm going to read it one like that, not the Sarah one. Oh, anybody else?
Just had one question.
Yes.
When did you start to know that you wanted to write this much? How old were you when were you writing in high school?
Well, I did take creative writing in high school, and it was this was like in the 1960s. So there weren't very many creative writing classes. It was a sort of experimental class that met in the cafeteria annex instead of in a classroom, and that in itself recommended it highly, right? And so I did. I didn't, and I became and I was an English major, as I said, and I became an English teacher. I didn't really think, though, about being a writer until I was about 30 years old. And but I already had notebooks. I had already written things down, but I didn't think about turning them into something that someone else could read. But 30 years old is fairly young, but that's when I started thinking about it. And I actually came to the Iowa Writers Workshop. I'm putting this way because she's a student in Iowa Writers Workshop right now. And we came to Iowa City in a long time ago, 1982, so that I could attend the workshop. My husband and I came. We brought our 3 small children. We quit our jobs in Milwaukee, and put our brother-in-law in charge of our real estate empire. We owned 2 duplexes, and we lived in one of them. That was our real estate empire. By the time we were done in Iowa City, we had lost both of them, because I don't know if you recall, but 1982 was kind of the last Great Recession. Not the best time to quit your jobs and go back to graduate school. But we did it, and now we live in this lovely house at the bottom of Ridge Road. So it worked out okay. The kids are all doing fine. Yes?
In the memo, it said that you might entertain an idea to have a workshop here, and maybe this evening we might see if there was interest in a possible time scale for it?
Yes,
Or
yes.
did you want to wait at the very, very end to do that?
Well, I mean, as well, since you mentioned it, I will say something about it right now. Yes, Dave Hansen and I did communicate about that, and he suggested that I collect names of people who would be interested. So I have brought this highly modern device on which you can write your name if you think you might be interested. And I think it would be good to write, I don't know, you all know, you could write your email if you want me to have your email, but you don't have to for that, for this purpose of showing your interest. So I don't know what exactly I should do with this. Do you think I should just pass it around? Start it? Pardon? Put it on the counter? Okay, that's a good idea. Can I move with this? I keep thinking I can't. I'm just going to go, no, here we go. All right, I'll put it on the counter, and wait a minute, we should also have a pen. I also thought it would be interesting, I don't know if you want to add this, but I thought it would be interesting to know if you lived in this campus, I don't know if everybody here does, or if you live in the East Campus, because then maybe we would, see about what? East Campus, okay. Yeah, well, I have a really good friend who lives on the East Campus, and so I actually probably spend more time there than I do here. But I don't know. Maybe that'll be kind of a guideline as well. Anything else? Very good. I'm glad you mentioned that, so you can sign up. And you're not signing up exactly. You're just signing to express your interest, and we'll see how we can make it. Maybe we'll have to have two of them instead of one of them, if to accommodate people. I just enjoy hearing the things people write. I mean, it's just like I say, it's very self-contained. It's, as an English teacher, my least favorite thing was taking papers home to read, and as if there are any other English teachers around here, or anybody, any of the humanities, so I don't take them home to read. We, write them and read them. And in some cases, you might decide not to read them, but you still will have written it, and you will have heard what other people wrote, and you will have heard what we have said about what other people wrote. I taught a course like this I taught this as a course some years ago at the Senior Center, and it was just great. I never had to take any papers home, and people wrote wonderful things, because then they could take them home and work on them some more, right? Because we talked to them about it, or expand it or use it in any way they liked. And then it's just fun to hear about people's lives. But I would like to read one more. Do we have any more questions? I think, well, it looks like I have 7 minutes. That should work, okay? Of course, I gotta find it. Hold on a minute. I wrote down the page number. Oh my gosh. It's in the, it's on page 25, if you're looking at it. Although if you're looking at it, I have to say, sometimes I change the word or leave a phrase out because I think it's easier to understand without it when you're only hearing it. Okay, this is, I have to take a drink of water. What am I doing with this? I had it in my pocket, and then nobody could hear. And so now I don't trust putting it in my pocket. Which is where you should be able to put it. Although it's best if you're wearing a blazer or a suit coat. Just one of those little things. I'm just going to stand here. And this is called King of Scrounge. And the, not grunge, but scrounge, as when you scrounge up something. Right? And the subtitle is Intimations of Immortality. Okay. My son Jeff appears in it again. All right. Among his film and video making friends, my son Jeff has had a reputation since high school for coming up with special effects on little or no budget. Only Jeff could turn a heap of broken calculators and molded styrofoam into a convincing Cyberman. And when I say convincing, I mean that the tube wrapped in electrical tape on the Cyberman's bionic arm actually fired flaming projectiles that used to be cold capsules. Just put a little bit of, what's it called? Gunpowder. It's gunpowder. That's what's inside those little tiny, and also those very large firecrackers. And that's how you turn a cold capsule into a flaming projectile. But anyway, Jeff's resourcefulness I attribute partly to his father, who's been known to reshape a Ford Pinto fender to fix the trunk of a Mercedes coupe, and to his father before him, a university professor and occasional plumber, who once claimed that the PhD after his name stood for Plunge Harder, Dad. But most of my son's talent for scrounging comes, I believe, from my father, who died when Jeff was 8. In 1983, on the last afternoon of my father's life, I said the rosary for him. The idea was not so much to invoke heavenly intercession as to help him fall asleep. I said the rosary as a lullaby, the decades droning on and on, one Hail Mary after another. My father was very weak by then, and it was hard for him to talk, but he finally managed to interrupt. I think you're keeping me awake, he whispered. Should I say instead? I asked him. He rolled his eyes. Sorry, I said. I would have liked to pick him up and walk him to sleep, the way he used to walk my kids to sleep, cruising around and around our dining room table with Jeff or Liz or Lauren in his arms, singing the same lullaby, half Croatian, half nonsense, that I'd heard him sing to both my little brothers many years ago on 4th Street in Milwaukee. Spavaj, sinko moj, lepo spavaj. Sleep, my son, it means. At least, that's what my father meant by it. Sleep well, sleep sweetly, beautifully sleep. Of course it works, my mother used to say. They go to sleep so they won't have to listen to your father sing anymore. There may have been some merit in her theory. My father didn't sing songs, he belted them out, even lullabies. His favorite tunes were from the 40s. At Hofer's Ballroom in Walford, Iowa, I'd often surprised my husband on big band night by singing the words to Begin the Begin or Glow Little Glowworm in his ear, words I had learned from my father. Dad also liked beltable songs of a somewhat later era, like Mac the Knife and Hang Down Your Head, Tom Dooley, which gave you goosebumps. Look at that, he'd say, interrupting his song to show you the goose flesh on his arm. I'm telling you, I missed my calling. I could have made a fortune with this voice. On 4th Street, there wasn't a kid on the block who would risk raising George Ellisage's ire, and thus his voice, by treading on his front lawn when he was seeding it, which was most of the time, or by taking any one of his tools without asking. The tools were in the garage, the same garage that he and 24 neighbors and a couple of cousins had carried by hand down the alley from its former location behind Butchie Tiedemann's house to our yard, where they lowered it gently onto the salvaged brick foundation my father had prepared for it. That's what I call scrounging. Relocated, that garage became the hub of the neighborhood. Your bike had a flat tire, you asked George if you could use his air compressor. You wanted the seat lowered, or as my sister's friend Pat used to say, hired. George was sure to have whatever size wrench you needed. If a screw or a bolt or a nail were required, you peered through the bottoms of dozens of baby food jars whose caps were nailed in rows to the ceiling above his workbench until you found just the size and type you were looking for. In a neighborhood full of scroungers and do-it-yourselfers, my father was the king. The garage was only one of many accomplishments. Both the stockade fence in our backyard and the privet hedge in front were scrounged. The latter, nothing but sticks with roots when Dad picked them out of somebody's garbage cans and planted them along our lot line, deaf to the jokes of neighbors who then watched the sticks grow into a shoulder-high hedge so dense not even the skinniest kid could squeeze through it. Most of the lumber with which he ruined our dark and mysterious attic by building 2 nice bedrooms up there was second-hand and thus full of silverfish. My sister and I squished torpedo-shaped bugs for years. Like most do-it-yourselfers, my father preferred not to finish a project if he could start a new one instead. With the upstairs lacking only inconsequential details, a bottom track for the closet door to slide on, a handrail for the stairs, my father decided to build a go-kart that resembled a red Model T out of lumber scraps, sheet metal, and that most salvageable of items, an old lawnmower motor. While my little brother sat up front and steered, my father trotted alongside, ready to hop aboard the rear bumper, flip a switch behind the driver, and drag one foot in the alley until the heavy car rolled to a stop. The missing detail: brakes. A few years later, following in my father's footsteps, my brother recycled the wheels and other choice parts of the go-kart to enter a soapbox derby. Later still, when shortness of breath made all my father's tools grow heavier, he and his friend Ralph used 2 of those same wheels to build a cart for the air compressor. When it came to recycling, my father was ahead of his time. After he died, the air compressor went to my soapbox building brother, which means that Dad's still fixing flat tires in Milwaukee. A lot of his other tools, wrenches and saws, a pipe cutter and threader, found their way into our garage and basement, where they have helped us build shelves and Cybermen, fix leaks, and keep a succession of old cars running long after they should have gone to their last reward. They've also taught us a lesson in immortality. Not long ago, in Iowa City, I was sitting on the porch when my husband came outside to pound some stakes in the garden with a hammer from my dad's old workbench. At the top of our porch steps, 265 miles and more than 30 years from the garage on 4th Street, which, by the way, he'd never seen. My husband paused, lifted the wooden handle to the sky, and said, "Just using your hammer, George. Thanks." Thank you. And thank you again